Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
What a beautiful day today, and so excited that we're all here. We've had a lot of exciting things happening in the community the last few days, a lot of busyness here in town, so I'm hoping you've been able to take advantage of that and enjoy that. Well, just a couple of announcements. Next week, Hunter Pinky will be here to speak. He's going to be sharing, of course, the Word of God, but he's also going to tell a little bit about his journey that he's gone through over the last 7 months after his accident there in Colorado. And we're going to have to try to figure out some way if we're going to use a ramp or whatever to get him up on the stage. But we'll find some way to do that. But anyhow, he's going to be here next week. And then our graduating seniors will be in the afternoon at the Wishock High School right after the services that day. We have our Bible study on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock, and I hope that you've been enjoying it. It's been challenging at times for not only for us, but for those who have been watching. I've been so enjoying it. And I've really enjoyed the questions that have been coming out, and it really was excellent this last week. We're going to be on the last church that is mentioned in that book. It is not a very uplifting letter to that church, but I think that they'll be very instructive for us. We will be starting our women's and men's Bible studies in September, as well as our Love and Respect. We'll be giving more information as time goes along, but we'll be starting those in September. Again, also pursuant to what's happening with the COVID and all that and so forth. I don't know if there's anybody who's had a birthday this week or today. I know a few weeks ago we celebrated Larry's birthday, but I have someone who's very special to me having her birthday today, and it's my sister in Colorado. She's probably watching us right now, so Patty, happy birthday. I'm not going to say how old you are. I'm just going to say that you are older, okay? So again, happy birthday to you. Well, let's all get started with a great song. First of all, we're going to do a song, but we're going to do the invocation as a whole church. So let's all stand. We're going to do the Lord's Prayer together, and we're going to do this as an invocation, and then we're going to go right into a song right afterward. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. We're going to be singing a hymn 5 minutes. I know get cut off on the side there. I'll have to fix this next week, but it's Lord, Speak to Me. In the very back there, so you can leave your envelopes there. You can also give through our website. You can also just send your check in. A lot of people actually mail their check to the P.O. Box. It's 245, and you'll find that in our bulletin. There's lots of ways in which to give. We have been doing fairly well. We have been a little short on our funds this last few months, obviously just from all the things that are happening. So I just want to encourage you to continue doing that. But so many people have remained so faithful during this time, and I'm so grateful for that. Well, one of the ways in which we express our thanks to God and for the ability to give back to Him is we sing the doxology. So let's do that all together now.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures clearly know. Praise Him above the heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.
You may be seated. Now again, at least for the next few weeks, maybe the next month or two, we'll continue to have the children just to remain in your seats. So just stay there, but you guys can respond. So Lane and all of you guys, if you guys want to say something or answer, you can shout it up to me and hopefully I'll hear, okay? All right, so what I want to talk about today is the idea of listening and listening to what God is saying and then doing what He says. But also, for the kids today, we're going to do a little lesson on what is the most important thing, or what is it that you treasure. So over the years, I have collected a number of knives. And I want to share just a couple of them with you. So one of the knives was, a long time ago, I always told, my wife and I have many kids. And I think Angel said there's probably 50 or so that call us mom and dad. And I just happened to mention to one of them, they noticed how many knives I have. Says, yeah, but the one knife I don't have, and I really like to have one day, is an old timer. And so for my next birthday, they bought me this old timer kit. It's a gift edition. It had not only the old timer that I was looking for, which is the pocket, the knife, but also this one right here. Well, I've always kept it in the container. I've never taken it out. And even though I wanted the old timer, I just have always kept it here because it was such a special gift that they gave us. So I always remember back on that sort of thing, and that's something I treasure because it reminds me of these kids that we have. The other one that I do is a lot of times I have many knives from all over the world, and one of them here is my last trip I made overseas. Is that right? Yeah, to Africa. This was a knife that I got from Africa, and I also purchased a number of them for friends and gave them as gifts. But this reminds me of all the times that God has allowed me to go overseas and to spend time and to enjoy the things that I've been able to enjoy in preaching and teaching. This gift here is a rather expensive one that was given to me by leaders of the World Rangers from all over the United States. I had served about 6 years rewriting all the stuff from World Rangers, and as a gift they wanted to give me something to demonstrate their love for us and for me, for all the work I had been doing over the years. And so they had this knife actually made by a very well-known knife maker there in Missouri. His name is Stokowski, I think his name. But anyhow, it's a Damascus blade with I can't remember the name of a Sandovar handle, I think it is, which is a Chinese deer. And they had this made for me and gave this to me as a gift when I left the national office. And so it's something that I deeply treasure and something that reminds me of the greatness of the people who I've had in my life and how grateful I am for them. So the reason why I bring that up is I'm going to read a little story out of Matthew. And I think that you'll find this very interesting. It's a very short story, but I think it's very instructive. So as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" You see, in those days, even these days here, we don't look too kindly on the tax man, do we? But back then, they were the scum of the earth, so to speak, back then. The reason why they were so reviled is back then, they didn't have like a tax code that they followed. There was an amount that they were supposed to collect for Rome, and what they would do is anything that they collected above that went to them. So if you remember the story of Zacchaeus, he talked about all those who he had defrauded over the years, he paid them back. Well, Matthew is one of those people who was probably very, very wealthy. Many tax people were quite wealthy because they would collect taxes above what was required, give that to Rome, and the rest they'd keep for themselves. And so here's Matthew, who is very, very wealthy. He's worth a lot of money. And this poor preacher comes along and says, "Come and follow me." And Matthew got up and followed him, and then took him to his house, fed him, and then for the rest of his life was a follower of Jesus Christ. He treasured him. And it only took just a few little words. And today, as we preach out of the book of Deuteronomy, the same thing's happening. We're going to be talking about just a few words that are being spoken to people. And so today's Sunday school message will go more about this idea of treasure box. We'll actually be making a treasure box, so to speak, during the Sunday school time. Well, I want to pray right now. Many of you know that Edgar passed away a week or two ago. And we also need to pray for Daryl Kruger and his family. But also during this COVID thing is that we see a continued rise around the country. My wife and I are hoping to travel. We actually had to make some changes to our travels because some of the states that they say the increases are too high, so we're having to avoid going there. And so I just want to pray for all these things. So let's go to Lord in prayer. So Father, I just thank you so much. I thank you for the life of a man like Edgar that I was able to get to know and to greatly respect and to honor, and the opportunity to truly honor him in his service. But Father, I pray for his family, and right now that they will see comfort come from you alone, and that they know that he is in your presence and you're watching over him, and he's there and you're having joyful time with you. But in the meantime, he's being missed by so many, so bring peace to them. I ask also for Daryl and his family that you will bring peace, especially to the kids who really were in such shock when he passed away, that you'll just give them peace and strength during this time. And Lord, throughout this whole country, as we are dealing with the COVID, and even in our own community where we've had a couple of cases just within the last month, Lord, please keep us protected. Please help us to do those things which are wise and help us to prevent the spread of this disease. And especially those who are most vulnerable, Father, that we just ask that you just keep an eye over them and watch over them and help us to be wise in how we deal with them. We love you. We thank you for all that you're doing in our life, and we give you all the praise. Amen. Well, let's stand for this next hymn, 501. It's called "Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah." Out of the book of Deuteronomy. We'll be doing so for a while. And I know this sounds like a strange book to read out of and to preach on, but I believe that you'll find this very instructive for us. And so the first one comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 1 through 8. These are the words Moses spoke to all Israel in the wilderness east of the Jordan, that is, in the Arabah, opposite Suf, between Parah and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab. It takes 7 days or 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses proclaimed to the Israelites all that the Lord had commanded him concerning them. This was after he had defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, and Edrei, who defeated Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. East of the Jordan, in the territory of Moab, Moses began to expound this law by saying, "The Lord our God said to us at Horeb, 'You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Break camp and advance into the hill country of the Amorites. Go to all the neighboring peoples in the Arabah, in the mountains, in the western foothills, in the Negev, and along the coast to the land of the Canaanites, and to Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates. See, I have given you this land. Go in and take possession of the land that the Lord swore he would give to our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to their descendants after them." You know, this is a very interesting passage because it has so much in it. And one of the things that's really interesting about Deuteronomy, it's actually one of the most quoted books in the New Testament. What happened is that, when they would refer to the Old Testament books, they wouldn't call them by name. They would say, from, the book of Deuteronomy. They wouldn't say that. Back then, people knew the book so well, they knew the Bible so well, that if they just quoted a certain verse, they knew where it came from. And so it seems to me that somewhere around 40 to 50 times Deuteronomy is directly quoted, and it's alluded to sometimes 80 times in the New Testament, many of them by Jesus himself. There's only 2 other books in the Old Testament that are mentioned more, Psalms and Isaiah. This book is divided into 3 sermons or 3 talks that Moses gives to the people during this time. So it has what has God done. He talks about what God requires, and then he talks about what are the rewards of following him. Now let's remember, Moses is aware that any moment now he's going to die. He has been told by God directly that he is not going into the land of promise. And so this is the last opportunity that he has to speak to his people. If I knew that within the next month or so that I would no longer be here, that I would die, and I would not be able to continue to pastor here, then I would probably be very careful about what I said and how I approach the scriptures for those 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 months. The time frame here, we think somewhere around a year and a half that he spoke these messages. And so Moses is being very intentional about what he says. He wants to make sure that the people that he is leading will follow the Lord. Now listen, he trusts Joshua a lot. Joshua has been alongside of him for the last 40 years. He's been with him and learning, and now he's going to be leading the people. He trusts Joshua, but he's still someone who loves the people so much, and he wants to make sure that they are taken care of. So the question that we often ask is, why should we read the Old Testament books like Deuteronomy? I mean, it's just a bunch of stuff from a long time ago. But it is unique. It has a very unique purpose, and its content is quite different. It doesn't read like when you read Genesis, which has lots of great stories, and Exodus has a lot of great stories. It doesn't read like that. But it doesn't even read like the content in Leviticus, where it goes, this and this and this, and you do this and this and this, or even in Numbers. Rather, this book actually is 3 sermons put into a book. Now, the next thing is it's one of the most influential books of the Old Testament. When we think of the Torah or the law or the Old Testament, when the Jews would refer to the law, they didn't always refer to Exodus, which has the 10 Commandments in it. When they would talk about the law or the Torah, usually what they meant was they meant the book of Deuteronomy, because it also has the 10 Commandments in it. And so when they were being settled in the land, they would refer to that book. That's what they used that book to live by. That book had the rules and the consequences and the rewards. When later on Josiah, they found this book that was hidden in the temple when they were cleaning it out, that book was most likely Deuteronomy. And then during the time of the exile, when they were coming back, they realized that the reason why they had been taken out of the land is because they had not followed the mandates found in the book of Deuteronomy. And And then in the New Testament times, the Jews often quoted it. In fact, when they asked Jesus, what is the greatest of all commandments? He didn't go and read Exodus. He mentions the book of Deuteronomy, and he says, the Lord your God, he is the one, and you are to love him with all of your heart. That's what Jesus says to them. He doesn't quote from what we would consider where all the commandments are in Exodus. He quotes out of Deuteronomy. Now, it's very extensively quoted throughout much of the New Testament, and it's very instructive for us, and it teaches us a lot, and I believe that we will learn a great deal from this. Now, remember, this is also a way in which Moses is teaching people. From now on, this is how you can teach the law. This is how you can teach each other. He talks about, first of all, the obedient life. How to live an obedient life. And this is found in chapters 1 through 4, which is his first sermon. In the next one, he then talks about the orderly life. How do you live? What do you need to do in order to live for God? These are the things that you need to do to live for the Lord. That's the biggest part. That's the biggest sermon. So, obviously, typically every Sunday I try to preach 20 to 30 minutes. So you can imagine this first one would be like a 15-minute sermon, and then his other sermon would probably be like a 3-hour sermon. I'm not sure that we'd be up for that. So we're not going to do that all in one time. We're actually going to take some time. It's going to take me a little bit longer to understand these sermons. But that's chapters 5 through 26. And then the very last sermon is the last few chapters of the book. And that's where he talks about his own life and how he followed God. He even mentions his mistakes as well, and how the Lord was able to help him do that. But the whole book is about this. The focus is this. It's about living a covenant life. Living a life that's dedicated to the Lord. And that's what he's trying to convey to the people here. So let me kind of share with you a way in which it's kind of done in the New Testament. Jesus kind of taught the same way, and he used what a lot of times we call parables. So I'm going to read a parable to you, and it's called the parable of the sower. The same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds were gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them all things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell in rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they were withered because they had no root. Other seed fell upon thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, and still others fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let him hear. So it was interesting that he tells these stories, these parables. He's teaching a way in which to learn truths about the Bible. But the disciples didn't understand it. They didn't understand this very simple message which we understand today. And so the disciples asked, well, here he goes. He says, the disciples came to him and says, why do you speak in parables to the people? Or why do you speak to the people in parables? And he replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Then later on, it's obvious that the disciples still did not understand. They still didn't understand what he was trying to say. And so then in chapter 13, verses 18 through 23, he then tells them what it means. And then of course, then he tells more parables after that, and he has to explain all of them to the disciples. So that's the issue, is that he's going to be using the same thing. And basically what Jesus teaches here is that faithfulness and fruitfulness comes from a devoted life to God, which is the very first sermon that Moses gives to the people. That if they'll follow him because of what Jesus has done, then they'll have a life that is good. Now, we're not going to go into heavy detail on this. I just want to show you, in the Old Testament, we have our names mostly come from Greek and Latin sources. Deuteronomy is a Latin word, but the words in Hebrew is vele hadebrim. That means the words. If you look in your Bible, you'll see it says the words of Moses. Typically how most Old Testament books were described or listed or called was by the first few words that were that were mentioned in the book. Like Genesis, it's Bereshit. So the name of the book is Bereshit because the first word is in the beginning God. So the whole idea is that these are the words that Moses is going to speak to the people. Now remember, their words, Moses has been with them for 40 years. He knows these people very well. He knows that he is not going into the land with them and they're going on their own. He speaks with great passion and love for his people. Remember when we first were talking about Thessalonians a number of years ago, I talked about the love that Paul had for the people and how he spoke to them. This is Moses as well. He loves his people so much, and he wants to make sure that they do that which is right so they can be successful in the land that they're going into. Now remember, Israel had rebelled on a number of occasions in the desert when they had everything that they needed from God. God had given them sandals that didn't go out, food every day, water, everything that they needed, God provided for them. But it's because of this God, this love for him, that he speaks so strongly at this time in warning them. And at the same time, this book has been passed down over the years, and even though it meant something very important to them, it meant something very important to 3 times in the life of Israel, and it means something even to us. Let me just kind of share with you this way. A number of years ago, a missionary and I were talking about translations, and he worked for Wycliffe Translators. They go all over the world, and they translate the Bible into the languages of the local people, sometimes having to make up the alphabet and everything themselves. I've met a couple of them actually did that. Well, typically, if you really look about it, if you think about it, so here's the Bible, and I'm just going to do this. So here's the whole Bible, and I don't know how many words there are, but there are many, 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 many words. But if you think about it, here is the New Testament right here. So if you're a translator and you want to translate the Bible, which one do you think you probably will translate? Yeah, I'm going for the little one too. And besides, it also is the New Testament, and it explains about the person and work of Jesus. But one day, one of these translators was talking to one of the tribes, and the tribes came to him and said, "We've so enjoyed the Bible that you've given us, but where's the rest of it?" You see, they knew by reading the New Testament that there was more to the Bible than just the New Testament. And even though the New Testament only a couple times mentions the Old Testament directly by saying, as the prophet Isaiah said, most of the time it would say, as the prophet said, or as it is said. And it would not mention a specific book. But somehow these people knew that there was something missing, and they asked, where is the rest of it? So it is important for us. It is a book that's written for us to use as well, and we can learn from it. And that's the goal of going through this book. Remember, these books were written to a people that was good for them, but it will be something that we can use today. So here's the heart of the message. We can't hear him if we're not listening. Pure and simple. Here's the thing. Somehow we have contrived a system that was in the time of the Jews. We think that it's like this really difficult way of following God. Like, they were always fearful, like, okay, if I don't do this, God's going to strike me dead. I mean, some of us grew up that way. Jessica, I think you and I have mentioned that a few times when we were growing up, that the faith that we were in at the time was like, if we did something wrong, God's going to strike us dead right then and there. And somehow we had this idea that that's how the Jews were too. That they lived this life that was very much afraid of the consequences of disobeying God. But when we really read it and we read what Moses is talking about here, he's talking about a love that's so easy to do. I mean, if we love God and truly appreciate all that he's done for us, then it should be very easy to follow him and do what he asks. Us as children who were growing up with our parents, now, I know that we had our rebellious times, and I know that we struggled at times, but at the same time, when we had parents that really loved us, we wanted to do our best to respond back to them. Now, the reality was we were still going to be their kids no matter what happened. And some of us have children who have had times of rebellion, like even our own family. But the reality is our children want to do something for us because they love us. And we have to think about, this is also the way most of the Israelites felt about God. They weren't fearful about God coming down and striking them dead. Now, I understand Moses in many other books of the Bible warned them about some of their rebellious living. I understand that. And he does judge them and condemn them at times. But at the same time, the majority of people had this very valued love. They treasured who he was and what he had done for them. So these are the words of Moses trying to teach Israel. This is why he's dedicated an entire book, 3 sermons, to teach these truths. And he anticipates the day, and he even puts in there a time when they're going to have a king and how to follow the king. Even though at that time they don't have a king. Kids. I love it. I did a wedding yesterday, and the kids were all running around and having fun, and it was just great, and I just loved it. It was a great time. Moses wanted to reveal not only the fulfillment of the promise in verse 8, where they get to have this land of promise, but he also wanted to talk about the blessings and the opportunities that they have to follow Jesus, to follow the Lord. Even in the New Testament, we have the book of James talks about this. He said, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And it's talking about this very issue of listening to the Lord. So we have to be listening. And all of the Bible is important. So in this very first part, of this book, in chapter 1, verses 2 and 4, he talks about this idea of remembering what God has done. And he mentions all those names and cities that most people will struggle with. I'm glad I didn't have to try reading it today. They would have struggled over some of those words. But it indicates what they've gone through. This is all the things he's wanting to say. It gives them a time frame. Okay, this is what's happened. This is what I've done for you for these last 40 years. This is what I've done. It reveals also the dangers. The names that are mentioned are some of the places that were dangerous for them. And he mentions how he took them through those places. It reveals what Moses did prior to his death to prepare them for the struggles ahead. Now, think about it this way. You have we'll use a wrestling team. So this last year, the wrestling team did very, very well, and we're going to the state tournament. So do you think the coach had any words to say to his team before they went into the state tournament? Do you think he just said, okay, guys, let's go have fun? No. What would he do? What would a coach do? If those of you have ever been, you're getting ready for a big championship game, what does a coach do? He reminds you of what you've done. He says, guys, look at guys, we have done so well this year. If you'll do this, this, and this, we have a chance to win this game. We can do it. But you have to do this and this. Remember what you have done and where you've been and where you have come from. And that's what Moses is doing. He's kind of like a coach and a cheerleader here. He's saying, listen, Israel, look at what God has done for you. He's going to do the same when you go into the land. Even though I'm not going to be with you, don't worry about it. God is going to be with you and he's going to help you. But he does have some things that you need to follow. And if you'll do those things, then you will be able to live out a successful life in the desert. It's kind of the same thing for us when it comes to the cross. That Jesus and the timing was just right for all that to happen. These are reminders for us as modern day Christians that God has a certain timing and he's going to watch over us. So remember what he's done for us. Remember the cross and all that happened. Think about this. The cross could only have happened in that time period of history. There was no such thing as crucifixion 100 years before, and crucifixion disappeared 100 years later. During that time, the Roman road system was the best in the world. In fact, it was better than during the Middle Ages. And it hasn't been better until the last 200 years in the world. The best time for road systems, so it's allowed missionaries to go all over the place. They also had a common language. They all spoke Greek at that time. That's not true today, although English is probably kind of like the common language today. The right people were in the right place. The person of Pilate, one of these days I'll do a study on him. The person of Pilate, his character, his personality was just the right way for him to do what he needed to do for Jesus. Because if he had truly been a good and righteous and upright man, he would have released Jesus because Jesus was innocent. But because he was a weak man politically, he had to give Jesus over to the whims of the Jews. And so this is what I'm saying, is that in the same way that Moses is talking to the people and saying, remember what God has done for you, the same is true for us. Remember what God has done for us when it comes to the cross. Now in verses 5 through 7, he describes the land and where they're about to go. And he uses such interesting details. Notice he starts by saying Moses is going to share with them the law. And although it's not a good translation of the law, or we think of this idea as like, okay, you got to do this, this, and this, and this. That's really not what it means. The whole idea behind the word Torah means the idea of teaching or to follow the law and to do what is right. The borders that are given are the exact borders that are given to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. That's why he talks about the rivers the way he does. That's why he talks about this land. He's telling them, this is the same land that I promised to Moses. Now it's going to be yours. It's the land I gave. So he's talking about this promise that he has for them. The book, especially these first 4 chapters, and this verse in particular, talks about how God is going to fulfill the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which he mentioned specifically. Now, he uses the word possess, and this word possess is a violent word. Almost every single time it's used in the Old Testament, it's very violent. But he talks about the promise. The promise was the implied promise that he wouldn't look back to Adam and Eve. But he specifically mentions the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he tells them it's their inheritance. Now, they had left for 400 years. He said, now you need to go back and take possession of that which I have given you. The land that we know as Palestine or Israel today belongs to them because it was given to them by God. And so they have the right to be there. And that's what he's saying. And so, unfortunately, there was people there that had to be taken out. And this is the idea behind this passage here. Enjoy what the Lord has given us. For Israel is the land that he'd given them. To you, it could be the children that God has given you. It could be the home and the things that you have, your job. He's asking you to watch over those and be stewards of that. God is active in our daily life. I know that there's a lot of religions that don't necessarily teach that. Even Islam teaches kind of like this idea that Allah is up there in heaven and he kind of just watches what happens. He is kind of a fatalistic God and he says, okay, you're going to paradise and you're not. But the reality is the way he teaches it is that he is just up there kind of just watching. But the Bible is unique in that it teaches about a God who cares about us in our daily life. He cares, he even counts the hairs in your head. Now for me it's getting easier and easier every year to do that. But the reality is that God cares and he knows everything about you every single day. He knows every detail about you at all times. And most religions don't talk about a God that cares about us that way. That's why Moses was so detailed in his instructions here. So here's what I'm asking you to do. I want you to find a book in the Bible and study it this coming few months. Or just listen to me every morning. I'm going to be going around early now at 7 o'clock in the morning and doing a devotion out of the book of Deuteronomy. I'll still have the other things that I do as well, announcements and so forth. And you can still watch me at noon if you wish. But the reality is I'm going to be doing it in the morning. That's typically the more time that I do my own devotion times. But here's the question I want you to discuss this week. And this is something this is the idea of listening to what God is saying. What passage or book of the Bible has really helped you recently, especially during this time? For me, it's been Micah 6:8, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. What has been helping you this week? Charles puts on a daily scripture, just about every day, right, Charles? In fact, this morning he put on as well. And sometimes it just speaks to people's hearts so well. And that's what I'm asking you to do, to listen to what God is saying. He wants you to remember what he has done for us. What he did for Moses, and he cared for his people for 40 years. What he's done for us through the work of the cross. Listen to what he's saying, and that's what Moses is saying. And that's the lessons I want us to learn. What is Moses telling the people? Because it's the heart of God that's speaking through Moses. And when he speaks that way, he speaks the same way to us. Let's all stand. And let's sing this last song together. I have to tell you, these songs, again, have just been incredible. They speak so well to our service and what the message is all about. So let's sing this last one called Sent Forth by God's Blessings.
Supper
that though it is words spoken to Israel so many years ago, may we take to heart the same thing, to remember the things that you have done for them and the things you've done for us. And mostly for us in this time, to remember how you cared for us during this very difficult time that we have faced as a nation. I love you so deeply for all that you continue to do for us and the things that you are teaching us during this time. May we ever remain faithful to that, Father. We give you glory and praise. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. God bless you all. Kelby, you can come on up and take care of the candles. And we will see you on Wednesday, I hope. And otherwise, we'll see you next week. God bless.